Revenge with Marvella. The ballroom glittered like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky, and every surface sparkled with gold accents and polished marble. The Military Tech Gala was the biggest event of the year, where defense contractors and government officials mingled over champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I stood at the entrance in my carefully chosen dress, trying to steady my breathing. Then I saw him. Uncle Arthur stood near the front of the room, surrounded by admirers, looking every bit the powerful CEO he pretended to be. When his eyes found me, his smile turned cruel. He walked over with long, deliberate steps, and I knew what was coming. Well, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I didn't know they were letting just anyone in tonight. He gestured toward the back of the ballroom, where catering staff hurried between tables. You'll sit back there. With the help. Nobody shouldn't breathe the same air as visionaries. People turned to stare. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others smirked, following Arthur's lead. My face burned, but I held my head high and walked to the back row. 3 weeks earlier, everything had changed in an instant. I sat in Arthur's massive office, the one that used to belong to my father before cancer took him 6 months ago. Arthur had called me there for what he said was an important family discussion. He slid a document across his mahogany desk, his expression a mixture of fake sympathy and barely hidden satisfaction. Your father's will, he said simply. I picked it up with shaking hands and read words that made no sense. The entire company, Dad's legacy, his life's work, had been left to Arthur. Not to me, his daughter who had worked alongside him since I graduated from MIT. To Arthur, who had spent more time golfing than working. There must be a mistake, I whispered. Arthur leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. No mistake. Your father knew you were too emotional to run a company like this. The tech sector requires ruthless decision-making, not feelings. He paused, letting his words sink in. It's all here in black and white. Signed, witnessed, completely legal. I looked at my father's signature at the bottom of the page. It looked right, but something felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. My father had always told me I would take over the company someday. We had planned for it. Why would he change his mind? The humiliation continued in smaller, crueler ways. For days after Arthur showed me the will, I stopped at my favorite coffee shop before heading to clear out my old office. I ordered my usual latte and handed over my credit card. The machine beeped. Declined. That's strange, I said, pulling out another card. Try this one. Same result. The barista looked uncomfortable as the line behind me grew longer. I felt sweat prickle on my neck. Finally, I checked my banking app on my phone. Every account was frozen. 0 available balance. I had money, I knew I did. My trust fund alone had millions. But I couldn't access a single penny. When I called the bank, they told me Arthur had filed paperwork claiming I was financially irresponsible and needed oversight. As my closest living relative and now head of the family business, he had legal authority to freeze my accounts for my protection. That afternoon, I passed a marina and saw Arthur christening a new yacht. His third one. The name painted on the side made me sick, Legacy 3. He was spending my father's money, my inheritance, on toys while telling me I needed to learn the value of $1. I stood there watching him laugh with his wealthy friends, and something inside me hardened. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. I needed somewhere to think, somewhere Arthur didn't control. I drove 2 hours outside the city to the place I hadn't visited since Dad died, his old off-grid workshop. Dad had bought the property years ago, a small cabin on 20 acres of forest. He said every engineer needed a place to work without distractions. The key was still hidden under the third stone from the left on the path. Inside, everything was exactly as Dad had left it. Dust covered the workbenches, but his equipment still hummed with power from the solar panels on the roof. In the back room, behind a false wall panel Dad had shown me when I was 16, I found his private terminal. My hands trembled as I typed in the password, my mother's maiden name, and the coordinates where he proposed to her. The screen blazed to life. Files upon files filled the display, organized in Dad's meticulous way. And there, in a folder marked Cerberus Protocol, I found something Arthur didn't know existed. Dad had built a back door into the company's entire defense system. Every contract, every communication, every piece of software, he could monitor it all from this single terminal. And now, so could I. The Cerberus system was beautiful in its simplicity. Dad had designed it as an emergency oversight protocol, a way to monitor the company if something ever went wrong. He'd installed it before he got sick, back when he was still healthy enough to worry about the future. I spent hours learning the system, reading Dad's detailed notes. Then I found the folder labeled Current Executive Communications. I shouldn't have looked. Part of me didn't want to know. But I clicked it anyway. Arthur's emails filled the screen. Most were boring meetings, contracts, the usual corporate stuff. Then I found the thread labeled DoD Contract Optimization. I read the messages with growing horror. Arthur wasn't just running the company. He was actively sabotaging it. The defense software Dad had spent years perfecting, software that was supposed to protect soldiers in combat. Arthur had cheapened it. He'd stripped out critical safety features, used inferior code, cut testing procedures. All to pocket the efficiency savings. Millions of dollars that should have gone into development had been redirected to his personal accounts. And the worst part? The defective software was already in use. Deployed. People's lives depended on it working correctly, and Arthur had deliberately made sure it wouldn't. Just to afford another yacht. I found Colonel Vance's contact information in Dad's address book. Lawrence Vance, decorated veteran, now heading procurement at the Department of Defense. Dad had saved his life in Afghanistan, back when Dad was still consulting directly for the military. They'd stayed friends. I stared at the phone number for 20 minutes before I found the courage to call. Colonel Vance speaking. His voice was gruff, professional. "Colonel, my name is Alexis Kane. You knew my father, Thomas Kane." Silence. Then his voice softened. "Alexis, Tom talked about you all the time. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was the finest man I ever served with." "Thank you, sir. I'm calling because I need to warn you about something. The software your men are using, the Cerberus defense protocols, it's defective." I explained everything. Arthur's emails, the cut corners, the redirected funds. Colonel Vance listened without interrupting. When I finished, I could hear him breathing hard. "That son of a he caught himself. How certain are you?" "I have proof. Emails, bank transfers, technical documentation showing where the code was altered. My father built an oversight protocols. I can see everything. We need to shut this down immediately." "I'll send federal agents to." "No," I said quickly. "Not yet. If you raid the office now, Arthur will hide behind lawyers and PR teams. He'll blame underlings, claim ignorance. I want him to destroy himself first. Publicly. So everyone sees exactly what he is." Colonel Vance didn't like my plan. He was a military man, direct, decisive. The idea of waiting while defective software remained in use went against every instinct he had. But I convinced him. "Give me 3 weeks," I said. "The software's current deployment is in training exercises, not active combat zones. Check your records." "I can show you that too." He did check. I was right. The buggy software was being used in simulation environments while they prepared for wider deployment. We had a narrow window. 3 weeks, Colonel Vance finally agreed. "But I'm watching every move your uncle makes. If those protocols go operational before you're ready, I'm pulling the plug immediately." "Understood. And Colonel? I need one more thing. There's a military tech gala in 3 weeks. I need you to make sure I'm on the guest list." I could hear the confusion in his voice. "You want to go to a party?" "I'm offering you federal protection and you want to go to a party. I want to make sure the whole world is watching when Arthur falls." He was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Your father always said you had his strategic mind." "Okay, Alexis. You'll get your invitation. Use it well." I hung up and looked around Dad's workshop. 3 weeks to take down Arthur. 3 weeks to prove the will was forged. 3 weeks to save everything Dad had built. Arthur called me 2 days later. His voice used false generosity through the phone. "Alexis, I've been thinking about our situation. Family shouldn't fight. Why don't you come by the office tomorrow? I have a proposal for you." I knew it was a trap. I went anyway. Arthur sat behind Dad's desk like he'd earned the right to be there. He smiled his politician's smile and gestured for me to sit. "I feel terrible about freezing your accounts," he said, lying smoothly. "Your family. So, I want to offer you something. A job. Here, at the company." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of job?" "Receptionist. Entry level, but it's honest work. You'll learn the business from the ground up. Maybe someday, if you prove yourself, you could move into management." He said it like he was doing me the biggest favor in the world. Like I hadn't helped design half the systems that made this company successful. Like I hadn't worked here for 5 years already. I swallowed my pride and my rage. "Thank you, Uncle Arthur. That's so generous. When do I start?" He looked surprised that I agreed so easily. "Monday. 8 sharp. Don't be late." That weekend, I prepared. I bought tiny data syncing devices online, no bigger than USB drives. On Monday, wearing my receptionist outfit and name tag, I smiled at everyone and acted grateful for my opportunity. And during my lunch break, when the executive floor was empty, I planted my devices in every server room I could access. Arthur's birthday party made national news. He rented an entire luxury resort, flew in celebrities, had ice sculptures and a live orchestra. The bar tab alone was over $100,000. Photographers captured every extravagant detail. I had copies of all the photos, thanks to the social media accounts of Arthur's wealthy friends who loved to brag. I waited for exactly the right moment. 2 days after his birthday, Arthur called a company-wide meeting. Budget cuts were necessary, he announced gravely. The market was unpredictable. Efficiency was key. 20% of the workforce would be laid off, effective immediately. People who had worked for my father for decades sat in that conference room with tears in their eyes, wondering how they'd pay their mortgages. Arthur looked solemn and spoke about difficult decisions and the greater good. That afternoon, every major news outlet received an anonymous email. Inside were the photos from Arthur's party, champagne fountains, gold-plated desserts, the $200,000 watch he wore while cutting a cake shaped like a yacht. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Tech CEO cuts jobs while throwing $500,000 party. Lavish birthday bash same week as mass layoffs. Let them eat cake. Defense contractors tone-deaf celebration. Arthur's phone didn't stop ringing. His PR team worked overtime trying to contain the damage. But the internet had already decided. He was the villain. And I was just getting started. The company's stock began to slide. Not a crash, not yet, but a steady, concerning drop. Investors were nervous. Arthur was frantic. I watched from my receptionist's desk as he paced his office, yelling into his phone. "It's just bad publicity," he shouted at someone. "It'll blow over." It didn't blow over. More stories emerged. Journalists started digging into the company's finances, asking questions about where money was going. Arthur called me into his office to fetch coffee. His hands shook as he typed on his computer. "They don't understand business," he muttered, not really talking to me. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to get creative with accounting. That's not illegal. That's smart." I stood there, holding his coffee cup, my face blank and subservient. What Arthur didn't notice was that his desk lamp was now positioned at a slightly different angle. What he definitely didn't notice was the tiny recording device I'd placed inside it 3 days ago. Every word he said was being captured in crystal clear audio. Every admission of creative accounting. Every justification for questionable financial decisions. Every angry rant about investigators and journalists who didn't understand. I smiled, set down his coffee, and returned to my desk. My phone buzzed with a notification. The recording was automatically uploading to a secure cloud server. Another piece of evidence. Another nail in Arthur's coffin. At midnight on Thursday, I sat in Dad's workshop watching Arthur through the Cerberus system. He was alone in his office, his face lit by the glow of his computer screen. He opened the Cerberus defense logs, the ones showing all his emails, all his financial transfers, all his crimes. I watched him take a deep breath and click delete all. A progress bar appeared on his screen. 1%. 15%. 50%. Arthur smiled, probably thinking he was erasing evidence. He had no idea what was really happening. Dad had built the Cerberus system with multiple layers. The main system, the one Arthur was accessing, was essentially a decoy. A trap for anyone who tried to cover their tracks. The real data, the actual, complete records, lived on a separate, hidden server that only Dad and I knew about. And while Arthur thought he was deleting files, the system was actually doing something else entirely. Every keystroke, every deleted email, every financial transfer he tried to erase was being live-streamed to a secure military server. Colonel Vance had access to everything in real time. Arthur finished deleting files and leaned back in his chair, looking relieved. He poured himself a drink from the expensive whiskey in Dad's old cabinet. He thought he was safe. He thought he had won. I closed my laptop and smiled in the darkness. 2 more days until the gala. The invitation arrived in my mailbox with military precision. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the Department of Defense seal at the top. You are cordially invited to the annual Military Tech Gala. Guest of honor, Colonel Lawrence Vance. Arthur found it before I did. I came home from my receptionist duties to find him standing in my apartment, his apartment, technically, since he owned the building. He held the invitation, his face twisted in amusement. This is interesting, he said, waving the card. Colonel Vance invited you to the gala. You, the receptionist. He laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off my walls. Let me guess. They probably need extra waitresses. Or maybe coat check. That's perfect for someone at your level. I didn't respond. I just held out my hand for the invitation. Arthur tossed it on my coffee table like it was garbage. You know what? You should go. It'll be good for you to see what real success looks like. Maybe you'll finally understand why your father left the company to someone with actual vision. He left, still chuckling to himself. I picked up the invitation with steady hands. On the back, in handwriting I recognized, was a note. Alexis, be ready. The world will be watching. LV. I placed the invitation on my refrigerator and began planning. Not just what to wear. What to say. How to make Arthur's destruction as complete as his crimes deserved. I stood in the back of the pawn shop, holding Dad's vintage watch in my hands. It was a Patek Philippe, given to him by his grandfather. Dad wore it every day until he got sick. It was the only thing of his Arthur hadn't found and claimed as company property. The pawnbroker examined it carefully. This is a rare piece. Excellent condition. I can give you 15,000. It was worth more. We both knew it. But I needed the money, and I needed it now. Deal. I used the money to buy a gown from a designer boutique in the city. The sales clerk tried to steer me towards something appropriate and modest. I ignored her and chose a dress that was neither. Deep emerald green, the color of power and money. A cut that commanded attention without asking for it. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a receptionist or a grieving daughter. I saw a CEO. I saw my father's legacy. I saw someone who was about to take back everything that had been stolen. The alterations took 3 days. The final fitting was the day before the gala. The dress fit perfectly. I wasn't going to the Military Tech Gala as Uncle Arthur's poor niece. I wasn't going as someone begging for scraps. I was going as the rightful owner of everything Arthur had taken. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. I arrived at the gala early, before the crowds. Security checked my invitation carefully, nodded, and let me through. The ballroom was already filling with important people, generals, senators, defense contractors worth billions. Then Arthur arrived. He swept in with an entourage, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. His eyes scanned the room, soaking in the admiration, the power. Then he saw me. His face went from pride to confusion to fury in seconds. He marched over, his security guard following close behind. What are you doing here? This event is for industry leaders, not I was invited, I said calmly, showing him my invitation. Arthur grabbed it, read it twice, then called over security. This woman is trespassing. She's a mentally unstable relative who's been making wild accusations against me and the company. She's stalking me. I need her removed immediately. The security guard looked uncomfortable. Sir, if she has an invitation, I don't care what she has. She's dangerous. She's looking to cause a scene. Get her out of here before she embarrasses everyone. More guards arrived. People were starting to stare. I stood perfectly still, not resisting, but not helping either. This was exactly what I expected Arthur to do. Exactly what I needed him to do. Then a voice cut through the commotion. Stand down. Colonel Lawrence Vance stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand. He was supposed to be giving a speech about innovation and the future of military technology. Instead, he was staring directly at the security guards surrounding me. Stand down, he repeated, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. That woman is not trespassing. That woman is not dangerous. That woman is the person you're all here to honor tonight. The ballroom went silent. Arthur's face turned bright red. Colonel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my niece, Alexis, and she's been having some difficulties. Mental health issues. She shouldn't be here. Colonel Vance walked down from the stage, his dress uniform gleaming with medals. He stopped right in front of me. Miss Kane, would you please come forward? I looked at Arthur. His smirk was frozen on his face, but his eyes showed confusion. He had no idea what was happening. Neither did anyone else in the room. I started walking. The crowd parted around me. My heels clicked on the marble floor, the only sound in the massive ballroom. I passed tables full of the most powerful people in defense contracting. I passed generals who decided where billions of dollars went. And I passed Arthur, who stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. Colonel Vance saluted me. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the microphone, I present to you Alexis Kane, the true architect of the Cerberus Protocol. The walk from the back row to the stage felt like it lasted forever and no time at all. Every eye in the ballroom tracked my movement. Behind me, I heard Arthur sputter, trying to form words. This is ridiculous. She's just as she doesn't, but his voice faded as I climbed the stage steps. Colonel Vance offered his hand, helping me up the last step. I should have done this 6 months ago, he said quietly, for my ears only. Your father saved my life. I should have questioned everything the moment Arthur took over. I squeezed his hand, then turned to face the crowd. 500 people stared back at me. Powerful people. Important people. And there, in the middle of the room, was Arthur. He was no longer frozen. He was moving toward the stage, his face purple with rage. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite my racing heart. My name is Alexis Kane. My father, Thomas Kane, founded Kane Defense Technologies 30 years ago. He built it on principles of integrity, innovation, and dedication to protecting the people who protect us. I paused, looking directly at Arthur. 6 months ago, my father passed away. And 6 months ago, everything he built started to crumble. Not because of market forces or bad luck, but because of one man's greed. I pulled my phone from my clutch purse and pressed a single button. The screens behind me blazed to life. The giant displays that usually showed PowerPoint presentations now showed something very different. Arthur's private emails filled the screens, every word visible in letters 3 feet tall. Reduce testing protocols by 40%. We'll pocket the savings. The DoD won't notice the downgraded components. Transfer complete. $2.3 million to Cayman account 4782. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. People pulled out their phones, taking pictures. Journalists who had been covering the event started typing frantically. These are emails from Arthur Kane, my uncle and current CEO of Kane Defense Technologies, I continued, my voice cutting through the noise. Over the past 6 months, he has systematically stripped funding from critical defense projects. He has knowingly delivered defective software to the Department of Defense. And he has stolen over $47 million from company accounts and deposited them in offshore accounts under false names. The screens changed. Now they showed bank transfers, meticulously documented. Every stolen dollar traced from company accounts to Arthur's personal holdings. This software, the Cerberus Protocol, was designed by my father to save lives. Arthur turned it into a death trap to fund his lifestyle. Arthur finally reached the stage. He tried to climb up, but security, Real security, not his personal guards, blocked him. This is slander. This is fabricated. She's hacked my accounts. Arthur screamed. She's confused and desperate and lying. Colonel Vance stepped forward, positioning himself between Arthur and me. His hand rested casually on his sidearm, not threatening, just present. The only thing confusing, Mr. Kane, is why you thought you could rob the daughter of a hero. His voice was cold enough to freeze water. Thomas Kane saved my life in Kandahar. He took a bullet meant for me. And while he was dying of cancer, you were forging documents and stealing his legacy. Arthur pointed at me, his fingers shaking. She's manipulating you. She's always been jealous of my success. This is revenge because her father didn't trust her with the company. My father's real will, I said calmly, was stored in the Cerberus system core. The one you tried to delete last Thursday at 12:47 a.m. The one you thought you were erasing while it was actually being live-streamed to military intelligence. I nodded to Colonel Vance, who pressed a button on his own phone. The screens changed again. This time they showed a legal document. My father's will. The real one, dated 2 months before he died, verified by 3 attorneys and a federal notary. It left the company to me. All of it. The will you showed me was a forgery, I said. A bad one. My father's signature was traced from another document, his signature on my college diploma. You even left microscopic traces of graphite from the pencil you used to trace it. Arthur's face had gone from red to white. That's impossible. You can't prove. I can prove everything. And I have. While Arthur stood there, his world crumbling around him, something else was happening. In boardrooms across the city, the board of directors of Kane Defense Technologies were receiving a very specific legal notice. Each director's phone buzzed at exactly the same moment. They pulled out their devices and read the same message, an official court order recognizing my father's legitimate will and invalidating the forged version Arthur had used to seize control. The message included links to all the evidence, the forensic analysis of the forged signature, the testimony from the attorneys who had prepared Dad's real will, the timestamps proving Arthur had accessed and copied my college diploma file 2 days before presenting his will. It also included notice that Arthur Kane was being removed as CEO effective immediately, and that I, as the legitimate heir, was assuming control of the company. And it included one more thing, a complete audit of every financial transaction Arthur had made since taking over. Every offshore transfer, every luxury purchase, every dollar he had stolen. I watched Arthur's phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the message, and his knees actually buckled. No, he whispered. No, you can't do this. The board won't allow it. They need me. The company needs me. Colonel Vance made a subtle gesture. I saw movement at the ballroom entrances. Arthur saw it too. His head whipped around, and the color drained from his face completely. Federal marshals entered from 3 different doors, moving with practiced precision. They wore dark suits and serious expressions, and they weren't there for show. The ballroom, which had been buzzing with shocked conversation, fell silent again. Arthur Kane, the lead marshal said, though they all knew exactly who he was. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and violations of the Defense Production Act. This is insane, Arthur said, but his voice had lost its power. You can't arrest me at a public event. I have rights. I want my lawyer. You'll have every opportunity to contact legal representation, the marshal said, pulling out handcuffs. But right now, you're coming with us. We also have warrants to seize Kane Defense Technologies assets, pending a complete federal investigation. More agents filed in, carrying boxes and equipment. They headed straight for Arthur's security guards, who were apparently more than just bodyguards. They were also being detained for their roles in Arthur's schemes. The charges include conspiracy to defraud the United States government, Colonel Vance said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Deliberately providing defective equipment to the armed forces, and misappropriation of defense contracts. These are federal crimes, Mr. Kane, and they carry very serious sentences. Arthur looked around the room, searching for allies. Every face looked away. The people who had laughed at his jokes, drunk his champagne, celebrated his success, they all became suddenly very interested in their shoes. Power, I realized, was only real when people believed in it. and nobody believed in Arthur anymore. The marshals cuffed Arthur's hands behind his back. The sound of the metal clicking shut echoed in the silent ballroom. As they started to lead him away, Arthur twisted around, his eyes finding mine. "Alexis, please," he said, and his voice cracked. "Don't do this. Think about the family name. Think about what people will say. Your father wouldn't want this." I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at him. This man who had called me too emotional. This man who had forced me to sit with the catering staff. This man who had stolen my inheritance and my father's legacy. "The family name?" I said quietly, so only he could hear. "You destroyed the family name the moment you decided your greed was more important than Dad's life's work. You put soldiers' lives at risk for a third yacht." I leaned in closer. "I am saving the family name, Arthur, by removing the rot." He tried to say something else, but the marshals pulled him toward the exit. As he passed through the ballroom, camera flashes lit up like lightning. Every journalist in the city was here. Every news outlet would run this story. By tomorrow morning, the whole world would know what Arthur had done. I watched him disappear through the doors, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even relief. Just a quiet certainty that I had done exactly what needed to be done. Within an hour, everything changed. The federal seizure of company assets was temporary, just long enough to verify the records and ensure nothing else disappeared. But the freeze on Arthur's personal accounts was permanent. Every penny he had stolen was traced, seized, and returned. The company pension fund, which Arthur had raided to fund his lifestyle, was restored in full. Workers who had been laid off received notices that their positions were available again, with back pay. My father's legacy projects, the innovations he had dreamed about but never finished, received full funding. The humanitarian technology division Dad had started, the one Arthur had shut down because it wasn't profitable enough, was reopened. I sat in the company headquarters that night, in a conference room surrounded by lawyers and federal agents, signing documents. Every signature returned something to its rightful place. Every page turned was a step toward fixing what Arthur had broken. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They unanimously voted to recognize me as CEO and to apologize for not investigating Arthur's claims more thoroughly. Several board members resigned in shame. I accepted their resignations without argument. Colonel Vance sat across from me, watching the process with satisfaction. "Your father would be proud," he said. "He always said you had his mind for strategy and your mother's heart for justice." "He taught me everything," I said, "including how to protect what matters." The next morning, I walked into Arthur's former office. My office now. Dad's office originally. It felt like coming home and claiming a battlefield at the same time. Everything Arthur had added was gone. The pretentious modern art, the expensive sculptures, the mahogany desk he'd special ordered from Italy. The maintenance team had worked all night restoring the room to how Dad had kept it. Simple, functional, focused on work rather than status. On the desk sat Arthur's Golden Employee of the Month trophy, something he'd apparently given himself. I picked it up, felt its weight, and walked to the trash can. The trophy landed with a satisfying thunk. From my bag, I pulled out Dad's portrait, the official one that used to hang behind his desk. It showed him in his workshop, surrounded by his innovations, wearing his Patek Philippe watch and his favorite old sweater. He looked happy. I hung the portrait on the wall, stepped back, and looked at it. "I got it back, Dad," I whispered. "All of it. Every piece." My phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Alexis Kane," I answered. "Miss Kane, this is the Wall Street Journal. We'd like to do a profile on you. The woman who took down one of tech's biggest fraudsters. Are you available for an interview?" I smiled. "Yes, but not about taking Arthur down. I want to talk about building the company back up. I want to talk about my father's vision." The news cycle was relentless and unforgiving. Within 24 hours, Arthur went from tech titan to national security threat. The headlines were brutal. Defense contractor's CEO arrested for putting troops at risk. Kane Technologies, from hero's legacy to villain's greed. Tech CEO's $47 million fraud exposed by his own niece. Arthur's wealthy associates disappeared like smoke and wind. The people who had toasted him at his birthday party claimed they barely knew him. The board members who had supported him suddenly remembered red flags they had noticed but been unable to prove. His luxury properties went up for sale to pay restitution. The yachts, the cars, the vacation homes all seized. His country club membership was revoked. His name was removed from the charity foundations he had used for tax breaks and photo opportunities. Every piece of the image he'd built crumbled. And through it all, I kept working. I rebuilt Dad's company, reinstated the innovations Arthur had abandoned, and met with every employee who had been hurt by Arthur's greed. I testified before Congress about defense contract oversight. I worked with the Department of Defense to ensure the Cerberus protocol was properly debugged and deployed. Colonel Vance told me later that the fixed version of the software had already saved lives in a training exercise that would have been deadly with Arthur's defective code. That made everything worthwhile. 6 months after the gala, I sat in the CEO's office on a Saturday morning. The company was thriving again. Profits were up, innovation was back, and employees actually smiled in the hallways. My grandson, Leo, played on the floor with his building blocks, creating elaborate towers and knocking them down with gleeful destruction. He was 4 years old and already showed signs of his great-grandfather's engineering mind. My phone rang. Colonel Vance. Alexis, I have a proposal for you. I'm listening. We're developing a new defense initiative. Real cutting-edge stuff. Your father had started preliminary designs before he got sick. I want Kane Defense Technologies to take the lead. Exclusive contract, full funding, complete creative control. I watched Leo stack another tower, his little face serious with concentration. What's the timeline? 3 years. Renewable if we hit milestones. This could secure your company's future for the next generation. I thought about the back row at the gala. About Arthur's smirk. About sitting with the catering staff while he pretended to be a visionary. You know, Colonel, the back row was a great place to watch the world change. But I think I'll stay up front from now on. He laughed. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Send me the details. Let's build something that would make my father proud. I hung up and looked at Dad's portrait. Leo abandoned his blocks and climbed into my lap. Grandma, tell me about great-grandpa again. He was a hero, I said, hugging him close. And he taught me that real power isn't about forcing people to give you respect. It's about earning it. It's about protecting what matters and fighting for what's right. Leo nodded solemnly, then wiggled down to resume his building. I turned back to my computer, pulled up the contract details Colonel Vance had sent, and started planning. The view from the front row was excellent.